Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you're all doing well. In this week's episode, I'm going to be breaking down an edit that I did recently in Photoshop, where I used the masking tool to essentially take an image from nothing to something almost portfolio worthy. However, it was as I was editing that image and thinking about making this video that I realized that there's just a much more important topic to talk about. And that is this long debate that's been going on since probably before I was born in the landscape photography community of artistic expression versus representative purism. And what I mean by that is many camps out there have a line of once you edit an image past a certain point, it is now not landscape photography and it becomes digital art or darkroom art, whatever you want to call it. And there's a lot to talk about, and I don't think it's just as black and white as that. So let's get started in talking about it. When I started focusing on landscape photography back in 2016 or 2017, there was a few people that I really looked up to and drew a lot of inspiration from. Some of those people were like Ted Gore, Michael Schoenblum, Ryan Dr, Mark Adamus, Aaron Babnick, and Nick Page. Some of those names you probably recognize. And one thing that they all had in common was that all of their images were just like literally jaw-dropping. They still are, by the way. That hasn't changed. But one thing I did that you should never do, that we all do as photographers, is compare myself to them and look at their work. And something I realized is I'm like, I don't have a single image that is as good as any of their images in their portfolio. At least that's how it felt at the time. And actually, I had the pleasure of meeting Schoenblum a couple months ago, and I told him to his face that I hated him. Mostly because I was like, come on, man, you gotta let us mere mortals touch the sky at least once or twice. You don't have to release every image and it'd be better than anything I could ever do. We got a good laugh out of it. And Mike, if you happen to be watching this, I still hate you, but with love. Anyways, something that all of those photographers have in common is that they have a slightly heavier editing style, some more than others. But it's very skilled in the sense that sometimes you can't tell what is real and what isn't, and that it's so good that most of the time you just assume it was all actually there in the image, and that they represent what could be real really well. Some definitely more fantasy and some definitely on the side of realism. However, what they all do really well is make it where you have to question that. You have to question the reality of the image. And what I'm going to do for this video is put my image on the screen right now. Hey, pardon the interruption. I just wanted to say, if you're new here, I live full-time in this SUV behind me, traveling around taking landscape photos and making videos like this one. And if you wanted to support me in more ways than just liking or subscribing to this video, there's going to be a little link down below that you can click on, and there's multiple ways you can do that, such as buying a print, signing up for a workshop, or just donating me a coffee. Regardless, it all helps, and I really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video. And I want you to look at it. I want you to nitpick it. I want you to look at the details, and I'm actually going to leave a link down below the like button that you can look at for a high resolution version if you want to pause the video now and take a look at it. So now that you've done that, if you did, you can decide, okay, this is what I thought was real and what wasn't. Here is the image that we started with, at least one of them. And you're probably thinking, wow, that doesn't look anything like the image that we ended up with. So with that said, let's jump into Photoshop and Lightroom and break down this entire edit. So if you're here for those editing tips, we're going to be talking about a few things, but I'm not going to go into drastic detail about how I did the edit. I'm just going to break down every step of the way that I did, but not show you the little details of like me painting in this and going to the next thing. I'm just going to break it down for you in a simpler fashion. Let's do that. All right, so before we jump into Lightroom, there's a quick story behind this image. And I was shooting at 𝐒𝐨𝐚𝐫 for a couple days, and it rained almost every day except for this evening, and I was waiting to film an episode there. However, I ended up staying on the phone with a friend for a little bit too long, and kind of cut my time a little bit close, but I thought I had plenty of time for sunset. Long story short is I got the drone up in the air, started to walk over there. It's not very far from where I parked. And by the time I got there, I thought that the light that was happening was great and that it was just going to keep getting better. I was wrong. The best light happened in the very first image that I took, and it just got worse from there. So this is the first image I took, and as you can tell, the light is pretty great in terms of how it's shaped around the rock. It's got some nice textures in the clouds, and also note that this image is slightly manipulated. This was the original, a little bit overblown. But what you're going to notice also is that we end up using this image in our final image, because if I scroll to the right here and you can see all of the images I took that evening, the light just gets worse in the sky. So keep that in mind. Now, the 5 wave images we end up using, this is my base image, and then I have a few other moments of the same exact wave, as you can tell. And then we're just going to build upon that using different parts of the wave in Photoshop. But before we go into Photoshop, The one thing that I normally do is a few preliminary edits before taking the images into Photoshop. That's things like changing my color profile to Adobe Landscape, setting my white balance, doing a tiny bit of manipulations here in the highlights and shadows sometimes, coming down here, removing some sharpening, gonna add that back in later, and then last but not least, adding a little bit of blue calibration and changing that. Also, I color balance and edit the sky layer just a little bit different than the other ones. As you can tell, I brought the exposure down in this. I changed the white balance a little bit different to make it a little bit warmer than the other images. And I also wanted the exposure of the rock here to match as close as possible to the rock here, so that when I blend them together, it's easier. And the next thing you're gonna do is just select all of your images. Obviously, I would have the sky image selected. It's my last one. Right click, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. And let's jump into Photoshop now. All right, before we jump into Photoshop, I just want to say that the masks and stuff you're going to see in the video are not how I would recommend doing masks if you were building an image like this. When I was doing this, I was trying to figure out what waves I wanted, so I built the image from top down rather than bottom up. What I should have done is like the screenshot you see now, where I start with my base wave that I've already shown you and build upon that using inverse masks and just painting in the mask area or the wave area using masks that I wanted. Instead, what I did was I used the base wave and then built it using waves below it in the layer mask. It's just a little bit more complicated and not as organized. And if I were to do this again, I would do it like I showed you in the screenshot. Don't do the way that I did it. I just did it that way because that's how I ended up doing it, and that's how I ended up talking about it in the video. But the end result is exactly the same. Just wanted to point that out. Let's jump into Photoshop. Now, the first thing that I ended up doing in my edit was blending the sky in with this image, but if you were to do it, and if I was to go back and do it, I would blend all my waves in first and then do the sky last. So if I turn my sky layer on and turn this mask off, and sorry, there's bugs around me, so you might see me swatting my face here and there. If I turn this mask on and off, you're gonna see how I blended that together. All I did was add a mask, and then I did a quick graduated filter from the sky down to the water. And then I went in and used a brush and slowly worked my way through the image, blending parts of this together. I'm just gonna turn it on and off so you can see exactly what I was doing and how I blended them together to make it look real. And I think the most unrealistic part of the image is probably this rock right here that I think if I had more time, I would go in and fix that somehow. But for now, for this video, I think it's good enough. And I'm very curious if you ended up picking out that particular rock not being real in the image. So just going through, you can tell how easy it was to blend that rock face together between both images. So if I turn the image on and off, you can see that here, how easy that was to blend. Okay, so let's zoom back out. Now that we have our sky blended in and we have that mask, we're gonna blend all of our waves together. So this first image, let me turn the mask on. Actually, let me turn the mask off, and then I will turn the image on and off. So basically, this is our base image, and I wanna take that and I wanna figure out what I wanna add from this image into that one. And it looks to me like this area of waves over here is the most exciting. It's what I wanna add to the image, so that's what I do. So if I enable this mask or disable it, you can tell that that's what I end up doing. And we're just gonna keep doing this throughout the whole image. So I'm gonna go to this group, and I'm gonna turn this mask on and off, and you're basically gonna see that from our image that we just created and the image underneath it, what do we want from this one? And I want this, basically I want this swirly part of the water here to kind of give that feeling of a spiral in my image. So let me turn that back on. And now if I turn the mask on, you're gonna see that appear, and we add that swirly part into the image. You're also gonna notice how easy it is to add these in, and that's because in moving water, it's really easy to blend them together in a believable manner, as long as you take your time in between your masks. So the next one, we're gonna see what we want from this particular image. And for me, it was these waves in the background and the little bit that's coming down on the rock right here. I really like the way that looked, so let's add that to the image. And all I did, as you can tell, mask on and off, is just blend that into the image using a mask. And then finally, this last part, what do I like from this? The only thing I really took from this last image was the waves down here. I can show you that really quick. Very simple, very subtle, probably not completely necessary, but I definitely liked the way those looked a little bit better than the image we had before. All right, so that's pretty much the entire construction of the image using the ones we captured out in the field. Now it's time to manipulate the image a little bit further and fix a couple of the problems that we had in our particular blend. The biggest one being that blown out highlight in the top right corner that I did try to recover and there's no data there. Again, first image I took, didn't expect to use it, wasn't bracketing or anything. Honestly, probably wasn't even paying attention and just more looking for compositions than anything else, but still glad I captured it because I ended up using it. So one way that I ended up doing this was I just did a quick little selection with the lasso, selected it, and then I just content aware filled that corner, obviously in a little bit more of a precise fashion than that, and that created this. So I'm really curious if you picked out that corner or any of the area of the sky that didn't look real or was real. And other than that, that's pretty much the only fix we did on the image. And the next thing I did was I just created a curves adjustment that darkened the entire image, and then all I did was luminosity mask brighter parts of the image and paint back in light. So this part of the image or layer is strictly just light painting or dodging and burning, to be completely honest. It could be considered literally just dodging and burning. That's all I really did here. And that's pretty much it for the whole image. The last thing I did was, as you can tell, there's a part of the image missing on the bottom, and that's for this last step. I expanded the image by just a little bit because I thought the rock in this bottom of the frame was just a little bit too close to the frame, and I wanted to just move it up just a little bit. Not perfect, it's never gonna look exactly right, like it's not gonna be in the exact position I want it. If I went back and took this image again, maybe I could think ahead for that. So all I did was expand the bottom of the frame. I content aware filled in that little bit of area you saw, and you can also notice that I warped and liquefied that rock just a little bit up in the frame. Not very much, it's very subtle, and I don't think it's something you would ever notice until I showed you the before and after. And that's the entire manipulation of the image. So let's jump back into Lightroom and I can show you the final stuff I did in there. All right, so now that we're back in Lightroom, let me reset the crop that I did. And I'm just gonna show you a few of the local adjustments I made. This first one being I added a bit of dehaze, removed some highlights from the sky. The second one being I brought up some whites of the bottom of the frame. I also warmed it up a little bit and added a little bit of a red hue to kind of match the sky a little bit better. Because again, remember we were using an image that was taken 20 or 30 minutes after the sky image. So getting those colors correct is really important. Something I also could have done in Photoshop is paint in a little bit more color into those reflections, but I think this is subtle enough and works. Next thing I did was just brighten up the center of the image just a tad. And you can tell that all that's really doing is just help draw your attention to the center of the image a little bit better. And the last thing I did was, it's very subtle. It's gonna be hard to see unless I zoom in here, but all I did was add a tiny little mask here that added just a little touch of light on that rock in the background. I could have done this, gone back and done this in Photoshop as well, but I just wanted something super subtle, so I did it with a local adjustment in Lightroom. And then I went through and did my normal adjustments, adjusting the blacks, the highlights of the whole image, bringing up the dehaze, bringing down some clarity, adding some texture, those kind of things, adding some contrast with medium contrast on my tone curve, coming in here and re-adding that sharpening back in. And that's pretty much it for the entire edit. That is how we started and how I built that entire image using Photoshop and Lightroom. And again, the only tool I really used in Photoshop to build the image was the masking tool. I just used brushes and was patient to paint in that stuff. But the realistic part is that it was really easy to blend a lot of that stuff together. The waves are super easy to blend together, and this rock face was really easy to blend together. And the only technical parts I had to do were all in these intricate areas in here to try to get it to be believable. So I'd be really curious to know what you ended up picking in the image. I think it's about to start raining, so I need to wrap up this portion, and I hope you enjoyed this edit and I hope it was insightful. I would love to know what you think down below of what was real or what wasn't if you decided to pause and look at this image closer. All right, so now that you've seen the entire process of me in Lightroom and Photoshop, has your opinion changed about me as a photographer? This isn't something new for me, by the way. I certainly do it a lot less than I used to, but in 2019, for example, I took Mt. Cook and readjusted its size to make it look more realistic to what it looked like in real life. Just recently, I added some sun rays to an epic drone shot that I took in Iceland. And all the way back in 2017, I took an image that I take from Iceland and added the aurora to it just for fun to see if I could, using a photo that I didn't even take. I used with permission, by the way. So does that discredit me as a photographer? Absolutely not. It definitely does not. Photo manipulation, even to this extent, has been going on for almost 100 years. One of my favorite photographers of all time, Van Ho, who is an absolute master of light and shadow and contrast work. Seriously, it's so much better than I could ever take on the street, and he did it 70 years ago. I highly recommend you go check out his stuff. This is one of his most famous pieces, Approaching Shadow. And if you're like me, it'll wow you the first time you see it. Now, what if I told you that that original photo didn't have a shadow in it and that he added it in post? Is he suddenly not as prominent in your mind? The godfather of landscape photography, Ansel Adams, spent excessive amounts of time in the darkroom fixing and manipulating his images. And today that accessibility is even greater to digitally manipulate and create believable images than ever before. You add on the fact that many of us as artists are motivated to create images and stop people from scrolling on social media and say, wow. It's driven by the algorithm. These two factors are where this topic gets really interesting. And I've heard some stories from people who have attended workshops and left disappointed because they attended and didn't walk away with images that they thought they would. Not because the conditions were dull or the landscapes weren't beautiful. It was simply because they didn't realize how much manipulation the host did to their images. New photographers, or even seasoned ones, can see work and think, wow, their work is absolutely perfect. This was me a few years ago. Hell, this is me right now. Except now I'm just a little bit more versed into knowing what scenes typically look like and tools to accentuate them. As a photographer, I feel it's my moral obligation to remind people of what the realities of my work are. I do this in multiple ways. You just witnessed one where I am just honest and I showed you exactly what I did to my image. And another way is that I have a somewhat diverse portfolio. Not every image in my portfolio has that dreamlike editing feel to it. I love a simple edit just as much as I love a complex one, and that's pretty much my entire style. And on top of all of that, I make these videos where you can watch me fumble around like a bumbling idiot and not capture anything at all to know how real it could be out there. And I realize that's my choice as an artist. And many would say that defines what my style is. Other photographers follow a style where every single one of their images has that magical feeling in their portfolio. And the truth is, they don't owe anyone anything when it comes to their art. They're not obligated to tell people what is real or isn't real in their images or how much they might have manipulated a piece of work. I do think that they should be honest when they are asked, but even if they wanted to keep their secrets, that's completely up to them. The truth is, I can't expect everyone to be as transparent as I am, and I can't tell others what to do. But I do think we can do better as a community as a whole. This starts with everyone. People need to stop gatekeeping in the space, claiming that if you don't do it this way or that way, then you aren't a true landscape photographer. That is just wrong. If you're a purist and only qualify specific levels of editing as what you deem acceptable, that's totally okay. What isn't okay is telling someone they are something less because they don't follow your definitions. Example, you see an edit and you think, this is too far. Maybe the image that we just worked on in this video. Instead of being negative in the comments, you could say, wow, that was a great edit and a believable presentation of something that might be real. Not, this is so much editing that this isn't landscape photography. Saying words like this not only make people feel like they are doing something wrong, it also creates an environment where being honest about editing is prohibited because people are scared that people are going to go grab their pitchforks.
Torches! Get your torches! Pitchforks! You can't be an angry mob without pitchforks!
And leave comments and say that you're not a landscape photographer anymore because of the way you edited your image. I suffer from this. In this video, I know that someone might watch this and think, wow, I don't respect Alex as a photographer anymore because of the way he edited those images. And on the other side of things, those of us that do choose to manipulate images in more extreme ways, talk about it. Let's appreciate taking a dull image and turning it into something extraordinary. This is an entire art form in itself. Let's create real expectations for other photographers out there that might be questioning their work because they aren't feeling as good as everyone else around them. Let's give people a glimpse into the reality that there aren't perfect conditions every day of the week, and that sometimes we take images and turn them into something a lot more via their edit. So if you keep up with any other landscape photographers or just the community in general, you'll probably notice that there has been a shift away from these grand, huge, dreamlike images in the last couple of years. A lot of photographers, myself included, have found themselves shooting more and more intimate scenes, simpler and refined editing. Heck, there's even been a huge upswing in film photography in the last couple of years. The tech wave of luminosity masking and high pixel sensors pushing the limits of what we can do with our images flooded our feeds with absolutely gorgeous images like the one we just worked on. But like all art movements, things change and styles evolve, and being inclusive to those styles is what's most important out of everything. A good example of that is the Natural Landscape Photography contest that was started last year. The majority of the contests in the space, if you're unfamiliar, don't have a ton of photo manipulation guidelines. One of the most prestigious ones that I know of is the International Landscape Photographer of the Year, and is typically dominated by dreamlike, highly processed images. Thus, it's really wonderful to hear that the natural landscape photography contest that literally started last year was wildly successful. And I think that goes to show that people are gravitating towards more natural images. And what's most important is that that provides a public open door for all types of photography. There's contests for natural landscapes, there's contests for highly edited landscapes, there's contests for simple editorial landscapes. And to me, that's the big takeaway here. We have to stop telling others that their work isn't good enough because it isn't done how we'd personally approach it. As photographers, we also have to be better about being transparent. Yes, post your incredible work, but also include how you got there sometimes. Let's revel in your excellent editing skills just as much as we praise your photography work. Okay, this was a lot to talk about, and I could probably talk about it for another couple hours. So I hope you leave this video feeling stimulated, and I would love to hear what you think down below in the comments. And as always, if you like the video, you can like it. And if you'd love the video, consider subscribing. I'll see you again next time. Later.